The sun rose over a plain of dust and silence. Before it, two armies faced each other, one in the east, one in the west, divided not by land, but by the future of Rome itself. To the north, the banners of Pompey the Great snapped in the breeze, his legions gleaming, his lines stretched wide across the field. He had numbers, cavalry, and confidence. Behind him stood the Senate, the nobility, the weight of the old republic. To the south, smaller, leaner, quieter, stood Caesar's men. Their armor was dull, dented, scarred by years of war, yet their eyes did not waver. They were veterans, the killers of Gaul, the storm that had crossed the Rubicon. They had followed this man through frost, through famine, through fear itself, and today they would follow him again, against Rome's greatest general, and perhaps against Rome itself. The dust hung still, as if the world were holding its breath. Somewhere beyond that horizon, history was waiting. This was Pharsalus, 48 BC, the morning when Rome's destiny would be decided not in marble halls, but in blood and silence on a Greek plain. Rome had been breaking long before that day. Its empire had grown too vast, its wealth too heavy, its conscience too thin. Behind every triumphal parade were men forgotten. Soldiers promised land, citizens promised hope, politicians promising anything to keep power. And in that chaos rose two men, once allies, now destined to destroy each other. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, the Republic's shining hero. He had crushed pirates, conquered the East, brought order to chaos. He was power-wrapped in dignity, the Senate's favorite son. And then there was Gaius Julius Caesar, brilliant, daring, dangerous. The conqueror of Gaul, the man who had seen the edge of the world and returned with gold, glory, and legions who worshipped him. To the Senate, he was something worse than an enemy. He was a man they couldn't control. For a time they shared power, bound by politics and ambition. But ambition does not share. When Caesar's command in Gaul ended, the Senate ordered him to disband his army and return as a private citizen. He knew what that meant: exile, ruin, perhaps death. So one night, he crossed the Rubicon River, the boundary no general could cross with an army. It was treason. It was defiance. It was destiny. Alia iacta est, he whispered. The die is cast. Pompey fled east to raise legions. Caesar marched south, fast, relentless. Unstoppable. Italy fell in weeks, Spain soon after. And now, on this plain in Greece, the two giants of Rome faced one another, each claiming to fight for the Republic, each knowing only one would live to see its dawn. The morning haze lifted slowly, revealing a stage built for gods and ghosts. Pompey's army dwarfed Caesar's, 45,000 men, fresh and well supplied. On his left flank, his pride, 7,000 cavalry, twice the number Caesar possessed. Once unleashed, they would swing around the enemy, crush the flank, and end the war before noon. Across the field, Caesar watched in silence. His men were outnumbered, hungry, caked in dust, but forged in 9 years of conquest. He rode before the 10th Legion, his veterans, the men who had followed him through hell. He raised his hand. "My friends," he said, "before us stand Romans, not barbarians. If we fall today, Rome falls with us. Fight not for me, but for the future that waits beyond this field." The words burned through the ranks. When he lowered his hand, the trumpets screamed. The legions moved as one, shields lifted, sandals pounding, dust rising. Pompey gave the signal. His infantry stood firm, waiting for Caesar's charge to lose momentum. The distance was greater than it seemed. Caesar's line slowed, faltered. He saw it instantly. "Hold. Reform." He shouted. The line steadied. The men caught their breath. Then another blast of the horn. They surged forward again. The impact was thunder. Steel met steel. Shields splintered. Spears broke. The air filled with the roar of thousands locked in chaos. Caesar's men, veterans of Gaul, moved like a living wall, rotating ranks, closing every gap, fighting with calm precision. Pompey's infantry held higher ground, confident they would grind the enemy down. But Caesar was not fighting for the hill, he was fighting for the mind. He knew Pompey's eyes were on the flank. He knew what was coming. Pompey gave the order. His cavalry thundered forward, a wave of muscle and armor led by Titus Labienus, once Caesar's own lieutenant. Dust swallowed the sky. Pompey smiled. The hammer was about to fall, but Caesar had set the trap. Hidden behind his right flank were 6 cohorts, 2,000 men trained for one purpose, to kill cavalry. They carried no javelins, only short thrusting spears. As the horsemen charged, the hidden line broke from cover. The two forces collided, and the cavalry's momentum shattered. Romans drove their spears upward into faces and throats. Horses screamed, men fell, the formation dissolved into panic. Pompey's proud flank crumbled and fled. In an instant, the tide turned. Caesar raised his arm. "Now," he said. His reserves surged forward, the third line, the final blow. The veterans pressed harder, their swords flashing like lightning through dust. Pompey's center buckled. Then it broke. The great general stood frozen. He had the numbers, the position, the gods, and yet he had lost the soul of his army. Across the field, his men threw down their shields and ran. By noon, it was over. 15,000 dead. Thousands captured. Pompey rode from the field, his crimson cloak, the mark of command, torn from his shoulders. He fled east, toward Egypt, seeking refuge. He did not know that death was already waiting on that shore. Caesar dismounted and walked among the fallen, men he had once commanded, men who had once called him friend. He said nothing. There was no triumph, no cheer, only the hollow silence of victory. That day, Rome itself had bled out on the plains of Greece. The Republic had not been murdered, it had taken its own life. The sea was calm when Pompey reached Egypt. He stood at the rail of his ship, staring at the white walls of Pelusium shimmering in the heat. Once, that shore had welcomed kings. Now, it awaited the ghost of one. As his galley approached, a small Egyptian boat came to meet him. Among its crew was a man Pompey knew, Septimius, a Roman once under his command. The general smiled. Perhaps mercy still lived somewhere in the world. He was wrong. As he stepped into the smaller craft, he turned to his wife, Cornelia. "Do not weep," he said softly. "It is the custom of great men to endure misfortune with dignity." Moments later, as the oars cut through the shallows, Septimius drew his dagger and plunged it into Pompey's back. The conqueror of the East fell without a sound. The sea turned red. The waves carried him away. A soldier, a symbol, a shadow. Days later, Caesar's ships appeared on the horizon. He had come to end the war, to restore peace, or so he told himself. When he stepped onto Egyptian sand, he expected to meet his old rival one last time. Instead, the Egyptians offered him a wooden box. Inside, Pompey's severed head. The silence was heavy enough to crush the air. Even Caesar turned away. "This," he whispered, "was not how a Roman should die." He ordered a proper funeral. The pyre blazed against the darkening sea, and Caesar watched until the last flame sank beneath the waves. Behind him, the Republic's last guardian was gone. Ahead lay something new, something dangerous. Egypt became both Caesar's refuge and his temptation. He placed Cleopatra upon the throne, the young queen whose beauty seemed to defy the gods themselves. Together they drifted down the Nile on a golden barge, banners of silk trailing in the wind, the air thick with myrrh and music. To his soldiers, it looked like the triumph of a god. To history, it was the birth of a legend and the death of a republic. When he returned to Rome, he was no longer just a general. The people hailed him as Dictator Perpetuo, ruler for life. The Senate bowed, the streets erupted, and his statues were crowned with laurel. But in the marble corridors of power, whispers grew colder. Whispers of kingship, whispers of betrayal. Rome, the city that had once killed its kings, now adored one in all but name. Caesar had given her peace, bread, and glory, but beneath the applause, liberty was dying quietly. He should have listened. The omens, the sleepless nights, the trembling voice of his wife Calpurnia begging him not to go. But Caesar smiled and said, "The end the gods have written cannot be changed." That morning, March 15th, 44 BC, the Senate hall smelled of wax and iron. As he entered, conversation stopped. The marble echoed with footsteps. Too many, too close. Then came the first dagger. Then another. And another. The man who had crossed the Rubicon, who had conquered Gaul, who had reshaped Rome, fell at the base of Pompey's statue. The same Pompey he had mourned on the shores of Egypt. Blood pooled on marble. Et tu Brute? And with that whisper, history froze. The conqueror was gone. The Republic, already dead, bled with him. But death could not kill what Caesar had created. His assassins fled into obscurity, their daggers clean but their cause lost. Rome wept, not for freedom, but for the man who had made her mighty. Within a year, his name became a title, Caesar. A word that would echo through centuries, from Augustus to the czars of Russia, from kaisers to emperors. Even when Rome itself turned to dust, his shadow ruled on. Power never dies, it only changes hands. He conquered Gaul. He conquered Pompey. He conquered the Republic itself. But his greatest conquest was neither land nor army. It was time. For over 2,000 years, his name has never fallen silent. It lives in every palace, every crown, every empire that dares to dream of eternity. Even in death, Caesar remains undefeated. Because though his body fell beneath Roman steel, his legacy rose higher than any throne. And perhaps that is the cruelest truth of all. That the man who sought to rule Rome ended up ruling history itself.